Thank you very much, Herman, and thank you very much to our ontological security reading group, which we established in the beginning of the pandemic. So, remain connected in some way. I'm so glad to see that you are continuing the collaboration and even organizing events like this. It makes me so very proud. So, I'd like to today talk about ontological security theory in international relations and its forays into existentialist theory. So with that, I am hoping to be able to connect more strongly what we have been doing in the field of international relations to the presentation that Professor Gertz just gave. So I will, at the risk of boring you, I will start at the very beginning because I really want to set the stage for how these kinds of explorations in IR theory emerged. So, as we are all familiar, with the end of the Cold War, a serious kind of soul-searching began in the field of international relations with regard to the notion of security, that we cannot only think about security in the form of security of states and their military security against other possible attacking states, and that we have to think about security more broadly as economic, environmental security, and at different levels of analysis, not only concerned with the security of states, but also societies, groups, and individuals. At the same time, what have been broadly labeled as constructivist perspectives entered the scene, and these perspectives were concerned with applying mainly theories and perspectives of sociology to the field of international relations, which had until that point been dominated by rational choice perspectives. So states cannot be only conceived as rational actors pursuing their predefined interests in the form of making cost-benefit calculations, but states are also social actors existing in a potentially forming society of states with its constitutive norms, ideas, and principles, holding certain self-conceptions, defining others with particular identities, and seeking not only the satisfaction of their self-interest, but also the validation of their identities. So that states, when they engage in a certain form of behavior, they are also seeking recognition from others as a particular form of actor. So these are the two, I would say, backgrounds upon which the concept of ontological security emerged rather late in the game, in the mid-2000s. And the initial formulations of ontological security in IR, in the work of Jennifer Mitson, Brand Steele, basically started from the premise that states do not only seek physical security, they are also in the pursuit of ontological security. And on the basis of this premise, they sought to make sense of some empirical puzzles in international relations. For example, why does a particular state engage in humanitarian action when a direct benefit to it in terms of material interest cannot be demonstrated? So, as typical of international relations scholars, probably they were trying to position themselves in the discipline through thinking of a new concept but by also telling others, look, there are things you haven't been able to explain so far, and only if you think of the notion of ontological security, we will all be able to better explain. So empirical puzzles are motivating the research and justifying this whole enterprise. So this initial group of scholars employing ontological security as a notion mainly drew on Anthony Giddens' work. And Anthony Giddens, as you may know, is a very well-known British sociologist, also associated with the formation of the third way. And basically, ontological security, in his formulation, stressed the need for individuals to have a formed framework of existence within which they can have ready-made answers to existential questions about life. Why are we here? And, what is the purpose of life, etc. He likens that to a cocoon, within which the silkworms and butterflies thrive. And once we are within that formal framework, cocoon, we can bracket out these more disturbing questions that we cannot find answers to. And this is the only way we can carry on with our everyday activity. So for Giddens, of course, the main concern wasn't international relations. His main concerns is how these formed frameworks of existence changed from medieval period to modernity, and how the frameworks established during modernity are now being unsettled in the period of late modernity. So there are, an increasing number of critical situations where individuals feel more and more ontologically insecure. So, of course, he offers a variety of formulations of defining ontological security, but basically it is about, to have a secure being, which is premised on the certainty and continuity of a sense of self. So having a stable, continuous self-narrative is an essential element of this cocoon. So are, routines. And often when I'm trying to explain this notion to students, I often ask them to think that when you went to sleep last night, did you worry about not being able to get up? No, you probably didn't. You were confident that after a certain number of hours, hopefully not too few, you will wake up and you will find yourself in the same bed, in the same room. So now put yourself in the shoes of a newborn, and the mother or the caregiver is trying to put the baby to sleep. Giddens also very much focuses on the work of Winnicott, who is an influential childhood psychologist. And possibly the newborn, because he or she hasn't experienced this routine of going to bed, sleeping, and waking up on a repetitive basis, may have existential concerns about what is going to happen when I wake up. Will I still find my mommy? Will the world be the same? So, however, through doing this, experiencing this manifold times, we come to the realization that there is actual certainty, that we can go into sleep comfortably because we know we will eventually wake up. Of course, there's no guarantee of that, and the world will be safe. So this is how, ontological security in life of individuals is formed over time. Possible existential concerns such as, will the world be the same, etc., are put aside because we, go through life carrying out certain routines, and then we have a stable narrative about who we are. Often when you look at your own baby photos, it's hard to think that, this is actually the same person. But what do? We form a certain narrative about ourselves so that we experience life in its various stages as the same person. So this is how, the notion of ontological security is conceptualized in general in Giddens' work. And he does draw on certain existential thinkers, but also psychologists. And Robert Lang, as a key psychiatrist who talked about the notion of ontological insecurity in experienced by schizophrenic patients. So intellectual background of Giddens' work is mixed. There is some existential references to the anxiety notion, drawing on Kierkegaard, but there is also reference to psychology, etc. So then, of course, it's a big step for international relations scholars to adopt this notion to how states kind of act in the world. But we have made a number of assumptions which are probably problematic, but we argued that, states also seek these continuity of narratives of their routines in international relations, so that, for example, participating in an international meeting in the aftermath of a crisis, it's like a routine that states find comfort in, and they are able to orient themselves in this rapidly changing and uncertain world. So, there has been a lot of application of the notion of ontological security in foreign policy analysis, the states experiencing ontological insecurity, for example, when their own narratives about self are not recognized by others, hence they cannot maintain their own narratives. So then they may resort to irrational actions, wars in the name of honor, reputation, revenge. I, in particular, try to apply the notion to processes of conflict resolution and peace building that parties to a conflict, even though there are, many advantages of coming to a peace agreement, because they also seek the continuity of their own narratives where, there is a clearly defined enemy, etc. They may choose to continue the conflict for various nonsensical reasons because they are able to maintain their ontological security while putting their physical security to risk. So in populism, for example, this notion has been applied in the study of memory politics, various areas, that are within the broad umbrella of international studies. So now I will talk about where existentialist theory came in. And I mentioned that there were, some references to, existential thinkers in the work of Giddens, but that wasn't the main intellectual base. And After a point, also these ontological security scholars in IR started to face various criticisms, saying that, you know, if all states want is stability and continuity of their narratives, then how are you going to explain change? You know, the world would never change if what you're saying is true, if every actor is trying to maintain the same self-conception at all costs. So these kinds of challenges that ontological security studies faced with started the search for maybe alternative intellectual routes and ideas, and this is where existentialism came in. And it's first, I think, you know, currently, the way in which existentialist ideas are being feeding into ontological security literature is primarily on the basis of the anxiety-fear distinction. So ontological security scholars have been drawing to this distinction and relation between anxiety and fear as it has been developed in existential theory, and arguing that this is where the real distinction between ontological and physical security lies. That states not only fear other potential adversaries who may attack them, but they're also anxious about their being. And this fear, anxiety distinction, you know, helps to explain in a more satisfactory way, I would say, why we need an additional notion like ontological security to explain state behavior in IR. So for Giddens are delaying, you know, the original theories of ontological security, insecurity. Ontological insecurity was more of a very extreme condition. Outside of this cocoon, Giddens argued, lies chaos. He criticized ontological insecurity as facing chaos. For R.D. Laing, you know, it was this incapacitating state of being that you find in schizophrenic patients. So they mainly thought ontological security is the norm. It is what enables agency, and most actors are in a state of ontological security, and ontological insecurity is the more extreme, rare, and exceptional condition. So when ontological security theorists started to draw much more closely on existentialist notions of anxiety, then they realized that, you know, within existentialist theory, anxiety, the state of internal unease that one faces in relation to the world is an integral condition of humans, and not, you know, as it is considered in normal psychological discussions, an abnormal state of mind. So you see, for example, a lot of writings these days, how after the COVID pandemic, there is a mental health crisis, there's an anxiety crisis. But this is not the way in which existential thinkers are thinking about anxiety. It's not a pathological disorder that some fall into as a disease in certain periods of their lives. It is much more of an integral human condition that arises from the awareness of mortality. And there, maybe it may be helpful to make a distinction between animals and humans. So I'm always criticized for being very anthropocentric when I give this example. That, animals are afraid of death. So, when they are faced with an attack by another wild animal, they escape or they attack back, etc. So they experience fear just like humans do. But do they also live always in the awareness that they will ultimately die one day and they don't know when or how? This is a much more specific human condition, and according to existentialists, this is what distinguishes humans, and it's something that we cannot escape from. And this structures how we act in the world. This leads individuals to identify various objects of fear. I mean, we all know we're going to die one day, but what can we possibly die from, right? Cancer? Oh, let me eat organic food all my life. Traffic accident? Let me make sure I wear my seatbelt. And, various other illnesses. COVID, let me make sure I wash my hands 10 times a day, then I feel much more. So we try to anticipate what potentially our cause of death may be, and we try to take precautions. And this gives us a certain sense of confidence, as if we have mastered the unknowability of death because we have, possibly identified all possible causes and we're taking our precautions, so we are much more comfortable. So therein lies the anxiety-fear condition. Because we cannot tolerate the anxiety that arises from awareness of mortality, unknowability of the future, the uncertainty that surrounds us, we need to invent and come up with objects of fear. And objects of fear are comforting because they provide us a means with control, regardless of how frightening they may be. So because, ontological insecurity, which is, kind of associated with anxiety in this existentialist lens, is so disturbing and discomforting that, states, individuals, and other actors are continuously preoccupied with defining specific external objects as objects of fear. And this is, in a way, how states also establish and perpetuate their authority over citizens, because if states are able to give people an object of fear, that, Greece may attack us anytime, then, instead of facing the general disturbing unknowability of life, we know what to fear, and we can concentrate our energies onto that. But what makes, of course, saying that, the world is one of fear, there are many fear objects, and they are not maybe actually things to be feared, but because of our essential anxiety, we turn them into fear objects. This is all well said and done, but this is not the real novelty of existentialist approaches for IR, according to me, because the real take comes from the fact that in a situation of anxiety, we also, anxiety also has a potential to reveal to us, the things about life that we are trying to avoid or to overlook. Anxiety is ambiguous. It is something that both attracts and repels, and it is something that reveals the insignificance of the world and potentially charts the path for a more meaningful and authentic existence. So anxiety has a negative and a positive connotation. So if we really dwell onto this, anxiety is not necessarily bad, even though we always try to avoid it, contain it. When we cannot, it is something that serves a productive purpose because it may enable a much more revolutionary agency as opposed to a status quo agency. So this is the aspect of anxiety that is, I think, the most interesting for international relations scholars now, because what we are arguing in various ways is that, you know, the world with its manifold crises, etc., is increasingly in a period or in an age of anxiety, where the established measures through which states contain or evade anxiety are showing their limitations, ruptures, etc. So what kind of an agency is this making possible? Which I know is kind of a very diverse theory of thought, so we cannot really put it in a box. But this is the aspect that is, you know, becoming of concern, increasing interest for IR scholars. You know, the prospect of climate change, the possibility of a species destruction. You know, when we as, you know, individuals and as states are facing with the prospect and the anxiety unleashed by that, is there potential for us to, you know, go beyond our usual established ways of acting, which I take kind of move outside of nihilism maybe, and to, you know, do something much more extraordinary. So that's the state of discussions, I would say, in my field. I hope I didn't take too long. Thank you.